Hi, Taniqua. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so this was a long time coming. I'm so excited to be here.
I know we've been trying to connect for months. 4 months.
Right.
So glad you are here. And really, I want to keep this conversation going. We've been talking over the past couple months about women's health and taking care of ourselves and our physical bodies and how that relates to burnout, all of those things. And so I thought you were such a great guest to have on, not just because, in the intro we talked about all your credentials and what you specialize in, but also because of the fact that you have your own journey with burnout. So I feel like we should start there. Like, tell us a bit about who you are, how you see yourself, and your journey to coming to where you are today as it deals with burnout.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I can talk about this so much because I think in telling our stories, we almost like set the survival guide for other women that come behind us. I wish that my mentors that I clearly now know, oh my gosh, you were so burnt out, really had a name for it. And I think culturally they just didn't. And so this conversation is so important. My story, I am a New York baby. I was born and raised in the Bronx. I grew up with a single mom who was from Trinidad. And so, as any immigrant child, it was all about education. And so I love talking about women's bodies. I was the 10-year-old pulling the Encyclopedia Britannicas off the shelf, reading all about my body and schooling my friends, right? Like at the playground. And so it made sense that I would end up going to medical school and specializing in women's health. And, I joke because I didn't just go to school. Like I went to school, y'all. Like I went to Yale undergrad and I graduated with honors in psychology. Then I went to Harvard Medical School and there was like all of this achievement like wrapped up in who I was. And I realized now that that was kind of giving me that dopamine hit, that achievement that this is what I was supposed to do. I excelled at school. So it all kind of gave me that feedback that this is what I was supposed to do. So I get to residency. And that was one of the more challenging pieces of my life because you're working in a system that you're promised almost that it's supposed to be this like altruism and you're supposed to help people and the people who are supposed to be the healers I felt like were on the bottom of the totem pole. And so having to negotiate when I ate, when I went to the bathroom, how much sleep I got or didn't get, it was just like this really and you were in a culture where it was just kind of like, well, everybody's doing this and you do this. And so when you're operating like that, it's very easy to fall into the trap. Well, this is what is just required of the work. And so made it through my residency training, went into women's health. I was at a big academic center and that's what I did. Like I slept in the hospital. I was away from my family. I ate when I could. I peed when I could. I exercised when I could. Everything was by the wayside in the name of taking care of patients and taking care of others because that is what defines a good doctor. Well, fast forward 10 years into my clinical practice, and I found myself behind the wheel of my minivan with rip roaring chest pain. And in residency, I was diagnosed with anxiety. It was very episodic, it was only on very specific rotations. And when I left residency, that seemed to heal itself, right? Like I had all of these tools, I went to counseling, and I was able to really get through that tough patch for me. But then as those sensations started cropping up again, and for me, it manifested as chest pain, I did the exact opposite. I was like, I don't have time for this. Like, I have arrived. I have done all the things. I am trying to get promoted. I am trying to raise children. I'm trying to do all of these things. And while the chest pain, which I now have a word for it, was my signal anxiety, that physical feeling in my body that was telling me I wasn't okay, it wasn't acceptable for me to like lean into that and really ask the question, what's going on? And so after months of having this chest pain, of being like tearful in meetings and kind of like escaping to the bathroom and really like chastising myself, being like, girl, get yourself together. We don't do that. You're a Black woman. You are on top. You do not do that. I found myself behind the wheel of my car and I could not get out of the car. And so I think that that was a big wake up call for me because it didn't matter that I had all of these like letters behind my name, that I went to all of these elite institutions, that I was doing what on paper was very meaningful work if I couldn't show up as the mom that I wanted to be, if I was doom scrolling in the bathroom, hiding from my children because I was that burnt out. And so I had the mood symptoms of burnout where I was just snapping, real irritability, a lot of anxiety. And then I had like the physical manifestations of burnout, which was the chest pain, the back pain, headaches, all of those things. And then my coping tools that I use to kind of get myself through anxiety and residency, I didn't want to learn. I didn't want to do it. I was like, nope, no meditation, no yoga. I don't have time. Right. And so it took me like finishing a whole bottle of Prosecco, like, oh, I drank that in one sitting, me by myself, my little self, And so that to me was the wake up call that I needed, that something needed to shift. And it still wasn't very obvious to me that that's what needed to happen, that I needed to make some changes in my life. It actually was a colleague who called me and very gently and forcibly at the same time said, I think you need a break. And I took a medical leave from my practice. I left my practice for over a month and did some soul searching.
Good for you. I think there's so many pieces to highlight in what you were saying. One is that part of the reason like I started this podcast is because of the fact that there was so little language. When I first started getting into the realm of burnout and discussing it, there was no language around it. Like people didn't know. And my own experience with burnout professionally was very, very similar, right? I knew something was wrong. I just didn't have the words for it. So I made up language like, don't be a quitter. I mean, I really blame myself. And so that's one level that I think people can understand. And I think the other level that people can understand is the drive for achievement in Black women. Mm-hmm. We've had guests on here. There's a similar thread to all of them, right? High achieving women who've experienced burnout, and the language of identity and achievement going hand in hand. It's like how I see myself is in what I do and what I can achieve in an outside way. It's not having inner peace. Like that's not on the list of achievements. It's more to the point of like, what can I actually do that someone else can see? What school can I go to? What job can I have? What like achievement in my income? And so I think that is important to highlight. And so my next question to you is like, when you discovered that, right? When you had that moment, when you did the soul searching, where did you arrive? Like, what did it lead you to?
Yeah. So I will tell you, making a decision to take time, and first of all, admitting that you're burnt out is really, it starts here. I resisted it because even though especially in like this was right after the pandemic. So there were so many discussions in healthcare around burnout, yet and still there was still this stigma even within the system. So, you're going to all these lectures and there are all these papers coming out about burnout, but you can't be burnt out because there's work to do. And if you're burnout, what does that say about your fit almost to be like a physician? Yes. So it was this like really weird space of acknowledging that I am burnt out, looking at the clinical definition of burnout, and I need time off. And so I had colleagues, I had to cancel patients. I had colleagues that had to take call from me. There was a lot of shame wrapped in that. And I remember those first days of wanting to fix myself, right? I internalized a lot of that shame. Like I couldn't cut it. But then something crazy happened. So the crazy thing that happened is that I'm sitting on my couch. My husband went to work. My kids went to school or wherever they were. I can't even remember. And I just remember feeling really bad about myself. I was like, you may not be as good as you thought you were. Like the language, like what I was saying to myself at the time was so painful. And I remember just picking up this devotional, and this is literally how it went down. And it was like, be boundless. And the word about it was like, live a life without bounds. You are made in God's image and likeness. So like, are you showing up as life's muse was like the actual word. And I remember being like, no, I really am not actually. And I just started like doing a lot of reflection of who I was as a kid, right? We always say our truest forms are when we're children. And I was a spunky little girl, like I said, taking the books off the encyclopedia, holding court in the playground, talking about periods, and I didn't even have one. And I was just like, would she recognize me? How can I get back to that version of myself that she would be proud of who I am now? And then really took a minute, what really matters? Like I was able to then see objectively, once I was out of the system a little bit, to say this system was meant to break me, right? Like the work that we were being required to do was just not human. And so it's like, how can I take back just a little bit so that I can actually live a boundless life? And what I end up doing is I embraced the whole quit identity. I was like, oh, girl, you need to start quitting stuff. And so literally I returned to work and I started just resigning from everything. And I was like dubbed like a rising star. And so it was like incredible to then see me saying, I'm gonna let this go. I'm done with that. I'm good over here. Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm gonna let go. And really kind of like almost like having my rebel self come back a little bit, that I was in the act of self-preservation. I was saying no to achievement. I was saying no to everything that I felt like I was supposed to be getting, right? Like promotion, all these things. I was saying no, and I was good because I was coming home every day and I had kids that loved me and a husband that adored me. I had a roof over my head and I slept good at night.
Yeah, I think people don't realize that piece. And a part of it really is because we have really stigmatized quitting. We have redefined it, misdefined it as an act of like giving up, which quitting in so many times is the exact opposite. It's stepping in, it is setting boundaries, it is taking care of yourself, and you cannot get it back. Like you cannot get what you've given up in the past, you cannot get it back, so you better reclaim it now. And I do
Right.
think, there is even space in the future. I do want to start having more conversations with women about what it's like to be a star that quits, because I'm sure along the way there was a lot of resentment and pushback, or just that identity of being an overachiever. When you go to reset it, there are people benefiting off of you betraying
Hmm.
yourself.
Hmm.
The whole system
1,000%.
is like, thank you for being the person that we know will stay late, we know will
Hmm.
take on one extra task. And when you readjust that, the fallout of that, and I'm sure a lot of professional Black women are like, this is why I don't set a boundary. It's like I started to, and then I had to quit my job because nobody wanted me around. Now that the new version of me was like,
Hmm.
no, I want to go
Hmm.
home. But it's worthy work, because
Hmm.
where we're going to come to, which is like I want to talk about when we come back, is I want to talk about what you did afterward, what you do
Right.
now, as in today, and get into the conversation about our health and just how
Hmm.
that impacted your decision to do what you do now. But it's worthy work for folks to know is that making the decision, taking care of yourself, getting help.
Hmm.
Almost every time I've spoken to someone, I've never spoken to someone who said it was a disaster. I put
Right.
myself first, I took care of myself, I found myself, and I'm homeless.
Hmm.
Or I hate my life.
Right.
That's never the case.
I had a coach at the time. That was my first experience with coaching. And I remember literally that physical sensation of like standing up for myself. Like we were role playing like this conversation that I needed to have with my leadership in my department. And I physically felt ill. I physically felt ill. I was like, I cannot do this. And she asked me a simple question. She was like, what is your worst case scenario? And our brains like to go to this place because it has that negativity bias where we catastrophize everything. And I literally was like, I'm going to get fired. My family's going to be out on the street and right? And she was like, "Okay, so let's go there. So you get fired. Okay, what next?" And I was just like, I get another job or I just take a break or whatever it was. And she was like, okay, so is it that bad? And is that really going to happen? And it really was like very sobering because I had been playing these scenarios in my head about what if I do this and, kind of going down. Have you ever seen the Inside Out too? How like the anxiety like kind of keeps going, going, going. Like that was me. And she just kind of pulled me back. And so for so many of us that were in this place, we physically feel it. It starts in our bodies. Some people call it intuition. Some people just call it back pain or when the wind changes, your head starts hurting, whatever it is. And we don't listen because of fear. We don't listen because we're worried about what others will think. We don't listen because we don't know what's on the other side of listening to that message, that signal that's telling us that something has to change and we're no longer safe.
Yeah, and it's in the listening is the freedom and the healing and the joy. And I think that's the part. But the enemy of that is the fear. And when we come back, I want to talk about one of the areas and topics that we often are so afraid to talk about, which is midlife, perimenopause, hormone imbalances. There's so much fear around that it
Yeah.
creates silence and inaction. And I really I want us to tackle that head on. So more to come. We're going to be back talking about how to have a boundless midlife, because I love that phrase, and how to address midlife, perimenopause, menopause, and beyond.
Yep.
So we'll be back with that.